Chapter 2 of the Human Behavior in Organization will tackle about the changing environment of organizations. Now, this chapter will talk about the environment of business that is changing at an unprecedented rate. The effects of today's changing environment permeate the entire organization. So therefore, to truly understand the behavior of people in organizational settings, it is also necessary to understand the changing environment of business. This chapter is intended to provide the framework for such understanding. We introduce and examine the five of the central environmental forces for change faced by today's organizations. We introduce and examine all of these five elements: the globalization, the diversity, technology, ethics, and corporate governance, and the new employment relationships. So we will be discussing further what these elements are all about. In this chapter, the learning objectives will be the understanding and discussing the emergence of the international management and its impact on organization. At the same time, it will describe the nature of diversity in organization and identify and explain the key dimension of diversity. Students will also understand and discuss the changing nature of technology and its impact on business. It will also describe the emerging perspective and perspective on ethics and corporate governance. It will also discuss the key issues in new employment relationships. When you talk about globalization and business, perhaps the most significant source of change impacting many organizations today is the increasing globalization of organizations and the setup of management. The growth of international business. In 2012, the volume of international trade in current dollars was 50 times greater than the amount compared to 1960. Now, the four major factors account for much of this momentum. So what are these factors? So number one, communication and transportation have advanced dramatically over the past several decades. And we are witnessing that the dynamism of these transportation sectors. And businesses, in number two, businesses have expanded internationally to increase their markets. And then number three, more and more firms are moving into international market to control the cost, specifically to reduce or especially to reduce labor cost. Now, many at number four, organizations have become international in response to competition. Okay, so given those for the growth of the international business. Now, another one is the cross-cultural differences and similarities. So how do we understand that? Now, the general observations on cultural and national boundaries do not necessarily coincide. One major review of the literature on international management reached the five basic conclusions. So what are these conclusions? Number one is the behavior in organizational settings varies across cultures. And number two, culture itself is one major cause of this variation. Now, the culture is the set of shared values, often taken for granted, that help people in a group, people in an organization, or people in a society understand which are considered acceptable and which are deemed unacceptable at times. And then number three is although causes and consequences of behavior within organization settings remain quite diverse across cultures, now organizations and they way they are structured appear to be growing increasingly similar. So that is how we emphasize it. Now, another one is the same individual behaves differently in different cultural settings. So the adaptability comes over here. And then another one is the cultural diversity can be an important source of synergy in enhancing organizational effectiveness. Okay? Now, another number two is the specific cultural issues. When you say specific cultural issues, there's a study by Gert Hofstede. Based on his study, he studied the workers and managers in 60 countries and has found that specific attitudes and behaviors differed significantly because of the values and beliefs that characterize those countries. So the adaptability is part of it. What are the factors that made these conclusions? Now, individualism versus collectivism is another one. And the another one is the power distance. Power distance is the orientation to authority. And then uncertainty avoidance, which has preference for stability. Masculinity, which has reference to assertiveness or materialism. And lastly, long-term versus short-term orientation. Okay. Now, when you say managerial behavior across cultures, so what are these? Now, some individual variations in people from different cultures shape the behavior of both managers and employees. Now, other differences are much more likely to influence managerial behavior per se. Now, in general, these differences relate to managerial belief about the role of authority and power in the organizations. Okay. Now, we go specific. Now, diversity and business. Workforce diversity refers to the important similarities and differences among the employees of the organizations. Now, employees' conceptions of work, expectation of rewards from the organization, and practices relating to others are all influenced by diversity. Now, a stereotype in a generalization about a person of group or group of persons based on certain characteristics or traits. A stereotype can lead to prejudice. A prejudice, a judgment about others that reinforces their beliefs about superiority and inferiority. Okay, so that is prejudice. Now, we go further, identifying what diversity is. So there is a dimensions of diversity. So the primary dimensions are those factors that are either inborn or exert extraordinary influence or on early socialization. For example, that includes age, the race, ethnicity, gender, physical and mental abilities, and sexual orientations. So these are the primary dimensions of diversity. Now, the secondary dimensions, however, they may be best permanent than primary. The primary dimensions, no? And that can be adapted or changed. Now, they include the educational background, geographical locations, income, marital status, military experience, parental status, religious beliefs, and work experience. Okay? Now, so we go further. Who will be the workers of the future? Okay. Some significant statistical changes in the workforce that was projected in 2014. White males will decline as a percentage of the workforce, while older workers generally, about 55 and older, will dramatically increase by 46.6% based on the statistical data that were pegged in one of the figures in the references. Now, the global workforce diversity. So when you say global workforce diversity, it is similar statistics on workforce diversity that are found in other countries. In Canada alone, for instance, minorities are the fastest growing segment of the population and the workforce. Now, increasingly, diversity is being increased in the workforce. or in a workplace is even more dramatic than compared to European countries. Now, the value of diversity. Rather than the traditional view of the US as a melting pot where people from culturally different groups were assimilated into existing organizations. But today, the US workforce is viewed more as a tossed salad made up of a mosaic of different flavors, different colors, and different textures. Again, tossed salad. Okay, assimilation. So we talk further, no? And we identify further the value of diversity. So assimilation. Now, the assimilation as we define it is the process through which members of a minority group are forced to learn the ways of the majority group. Dominant groups tend to be self-perpetuating and be unaware of outside opinions. Ignoring diversity, however, can result in tension, can result in lower productivity, and can increase absenteeism and turnover, lower morale and more equal opportunity, and harassment lawsuit against employers. So that would result into there. Now, another one is in valuing diversity. So when you say valuing the diversity means putting an end to the assumption that everyone who is not a member of the dominant group must assimilate. Valuing diversity is not just the right thing to do for the workers. It is the right thing to do for the organizations, but financially and economically. Okay, so that's the effect of it. Now we talk about technology and business. What are the relationship? Technology refers to the methods used to create products, including both the physical goods and the intangible services. Now, technological change has become a major driver for other forms of technological change. Three specific areas of technology is worth noting for and are the shift towards a service-oriented based economy. Now, the growing use of technology for competitive advantage and mushrooming change in information technology. Okay, so we cite now some of the industries. Manufacturing and service technologies manufacturing. It is a form of business that combines and transforms as resources into tangible outcomes that are sold to other manufacturing entered a period of long decline in the US during the 1970s, primarily because of foreign competition. Now, US manufacturing has regained a competitive position in many different industries, and the service sector continues to grow vigorously. A service organization is one that transforms resources into tangible output and creates a time or place utility for its customers. Next is the technology and competition. How do we relate to that? Technology is the basis of competition for some firms. Another challenge is meeting constant demand to increase or decrease rather cycle time. So the time required to accomplish some recurring activity or function, which businesses increasingly are finding can make them more competitive. Okay, so that's the effects of it. Next is the information technology. That the information technology has resulted in leaner organizations, more flexible in operations, increased collaboration among employees, more flexible work sites, and improved management processes and systems. On the other hand, it has also led to less personal communication and less downtime for managers and employees, and an increased sense of urgency. Okay, so that's the downside of it. So that is for the information technology. Now, we integrate the ethics and corporate governance. Framing the ethical issues in governance in an organization. One special aspect of business ethics, the corporate governance, has taken an increased importance. And most ethical dilemmas faced by managers relate to how the organization treats its employees, how employees treat the organization, and how employees and organization treat its economic agents. Now, how an organization treats its employees rather. One important area of managerial ethics is the treatment of employees, to include the hiring and the firing, the wages, the working conditions, employee privacy and respect. So these are the issues. Okay. And another one is how employees treat the organization. Now, ethical issues stem from how employees treat the organization with regard to conflicts of interest, secrecy and confidentiality, and honesty. Okay? Another one is how employees and the organization treat its economic agents. Okay, against of interest include customers, include competitors rather, stockholders, suppliers, dealers, and unions. Interaction subject to ethical ambiguity. That includes advertising and promotion, disclosure, disclosures, financial disclosures, ordering and purchasing, shipping and solicitations, bargaining and negotiations, and other business relationships. So this is how employees and the organization treats each other through economic agents. Now, we discussed further on ethical issues in corporate governance. The corporate governance is the oversight of a public corporation by its board of directors. The biggest complaint today leveled at boards often relates to board dependence or independence rather. And then another ethical issues in information technology, individual rights to privacy, and the potential abuse of information technology are specific questions in this area of concerns. Okay? Now, we go to the new employment relationship. The management of knowledge workers. Now, unlike traditional employees who added value to organizations because of what they did or because of their experience, knowledge workers add value simply because of what they know. Examples that includes computer scientists or the physical scientists, the engineers, product designers, video game developers. So these are the best example of it. Now, these they often believe they have right to work in an autonomous fashion and then identify strongly with their profession and require extensive, highly specialized training. And then compensation and related policies for knowledge workers must be highly tailored. Okay? Now, outsourcing. Outsourcing, this is a practice of hiring other firms to do the work previously performed by the organization itself. It helps firms focus their core activities and avoid being sidetracked into secondary activities. While outsourcing makes good business sense in areas that are highly unrelated to a firm's core business activities, it has drawn criticism. Why? Because of a trend toward outsourcing abroad merely to cut labor cost primarily. Okay? Now, the temporary and contingency workers, so the treatment of it. A contingent worker works for an organization on something other than a permanent or full-time basis. Contingent workers include independent contractors, on-call workers, temporary employees, however, and contract and these employees. Now, managing contingent and part-time workers is not straightforward from a behavior perspective. Okay? So that is for the temporary and contingency workers. Now, the tiered workforce. A tiered workforce exists when one group has a contractual arrangement with the organization different from that of another group performing the same jobs. That is tiered workforce. Okay? So I guess I have already articulated some of the areas that are being tackled in Chapter 2, the changing environment of organization. Thank you very much and see you again in my next chapter.